But of course she was not back before the tulips bloomed. It nearly killed my father after she left. I know it. But he continued doing everything just as before, whistling and humming and finding little gifts for people. He kept bringing home gifts for my mother and stacking them in a pile in their bedroom. On that night, he found out she wasn't coming back. He chipped away at the plaster wall and discovered the brick fireplace beneath. The next day, he flew to Lewiston, Idaho, and when he came back, he did nothing for 3 days but chip and chip until every last piece of plaster was removed from the fireplace and every brick was scrubbed. Some of the cement grouting had to be replaced, and I saw that he had written her name in tiny letters in the new cement. He wrote Chanhassen, not sugar. 3 weeks later, he put the farm up for sale, but this time he was receiving letters from Mrs. Cadaver, and I knew that he was answering her letters. Then he drove up to see Mrs. Cadaver while I stayed with Graham and Gramps. When he came back, he said we were moving to Euclid, and Mrs. Cadaver had helped him find a job. I didn't even wonder how he had met her or how long he had known her. I ignored her whole existence. Besides, I was too busy throwing the most colossal temper tantrums, and I refused to move. I would not leave our farm, our maple tree, our swimming hole, our pigs, our chickens, our hayloft. I would not leave the place which belonged to me. I would not leave the place to which I was convinced my mother might return. At first, my father did not argue with me. He let me behave like a wild boar. At last, he took down the for sale sign and put up a for rent sign. He said he would rent out the farm, hire someone to take care for the animals and the crops, and rent a house for us in Euclid. The farm would still belong to us one day. We could return it, but now, he said, we have to leave because your mother is haunting me day and night. She's in our fields, the air, the barn, the walls, the trees. He said we were making this move to learn about bravery and courage. That sounded awfully familiar. In the end, I think I merely ran out of steam. I stopped throwing tantrums. I didn't help pack, but when the time came, I climbed in the car and joined my father for our move to Euclid. I did not feel brave, and I did not feel courageous. When I told my story of Phoebe and Graham and Gramps, I mentioned none of this. They knew it already. They knew my father was a good man. They knew I did not want to leave the farm. They knew my father felt we had to leave. They also knew that my father had tried many times to explain to me about Margaret, but I wouldn't hear it. On that day, on that long day when my father and I left the farm behind and drove to Euclid, I wished that my father were not such a good man, for if he were not, then there would be someone else to blame for my mother's leaving. I didn't want to blame her. She was my mother, and she was a part of me.